I'm director of the World Ocean Observatory, which is an online-based information service for the ocean defined as an integrated global social system. A Bioneer is an individual working within a community to affect social change through systems that emulate natural processes. What is wonderful about the ocean, what is key about the ocean, and what drives me every day is I realize that unlike anything else in the world, it is the one system that connects everybody. I believe that the models and structures that exist are tired and impractical. And as the world collapses around us, they are unaffordable. And so you will watch a whole series of very large NGOs that are involved in conservation and all the rest of it. As philanthropy diminishes, they cannot afford this sort of massive infrastructure. We have to invent not only new premises, but new structures, and then use that as a way of uniting from the bottom up a global constituency for the ocean. Interestingly enough, I also run a second organization which is called the Ocean Classroom Foundation, and it has 3 sailing vessels, schooners, research vessels, and we take young people out, training them to be stewards for the ocean through education under sail for accredited program at the high school, gap, and college level. And so my straddle is just wonderful because I've got the totally virtual out here with global reach, and here I'm actually transforming kids on the water. And that to me is the kind of thinking that has to apply here. We have to start thinking collaboratively, we have to start thinking in terms of communications and connection, and we have to start inventing new structures that will essentially are feasible economically. If in fact human behavior disrupts the natural order of things, and we have done that fairly with method in our attempts over time to domesticate nature, okay, but the fact is now that we've gotten to a crisis moment where the positive impacts are overwhelmed by the negative impacts, it requires a reevaluation. And the reevaluation says, look at the natural synergies and emulate the management structures and the political agreements in order to make sure that those efficiencies are sustained. We're already fighting water wars. People will say that the whole Middle East conflict is based not on oil, but on water. Not on necessarily the integrity of nation states, but the ability of those nation states to survive because the water that is in the Jordan River has to be shared by everyone for them to survive. You can look at the Colorado River and realize that we have already contracted for the entire volume of the Colorado River in a given year, so that international contracts to provide water to multinational corporations in Mexico to grow tomatoes to build Tabasco can't be fulfilled because there's nothing at the end of the pipeline. So and then you have Cochabamba. You have the whole issue of privatization of natural resources and the people rising up to take up control of their water supply and the management of their water supply when they realize that in exchange for infrastructure improvement, rates go through the roof. That's a war. That's an act of conflict. And that was resolved, by essentially one interest defeating another interest. So water wars already exist. What we need to realize is that we can't just be reactive and protective and hoard, because it's just the obverse of profligate waste, right? Is that we have to manage the resource, and the management of the resources has to be regional, and it has to understand the full implication of consumption, and that has to be done in terms of parity and efficiency. And equity. And those systems have yet to arise. You can see it a little bit in New York City, for example, where the New York City and New York State have spent an enormous amount of money buying up the watershed in 3 or 4 states and protecting it against development so that it becomes the natural purifier of water resources coming out of the Adirondacks and all the other areas. Very prescient, Conservationists like it because it maintains animal habitat. It sustains trees and forests, so it has a CO2 implication. It's good collective policy, and therefore the largest or second largest city in the country has brilliantly tasteful, lovely, copious amounts of water because they've taken the initiative in time to be able to protect the full integrated system, given the sort of dinosaur-like structures that have now grown, is to start over again. And actually, I think that's what's happening here. I know it's happening in my work, that my work now is essentially one person and a few people. There's no rent. There's no benefit package. There's no expense account. There's no multiple layers of management. It's basically information, interpreters of information and communicators, and audience. And the idea is to remove all the barriers in between. The whole idea is to try to make someone understand, individual to individual, what it means. How do you feel the impact of this versus that? If your beach is closed because of a red tide, you'll think about what a red tide. You might ask what a red tide is, and then you might ask, well, why do we have them? And then you might ask, well, what should we do about that so that I can take my children to the beach or my grandchildren to the beach? And it's those kinds of connections that have to be made and which aren't being made. And this person said to me, well, you're trying to save the world. And it was sort of as if that was preposterous. And I said to myself, well, actually, that's true. And if, in fact, everybody got up this morning and said, my job today is to save the world, maybe we'd have a shot. So I'm looking for, and that's what I think Bioneers represents, I'm looking for individual engagement within the context of a certain value system based on natural synergies that will have revolutionary social and political effect soon.